All right, guys. So today's conversation, we got pens, by the way. If anyone needs pens, anything, there's box of pens over there, notebooks, there's handouts somewhere if anyone needs them. And we'll talk through this talk here. And for those of you online, if anyone needs anything, just give me a message. I'll send you the handout. I'll send you the notes if you need them. But today we're going to do kind of a different topic, and it's going to be about the extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. So in my life, okay, I've always had a fascination with aliens, with the documentaries, with the shows, with the movies. And when I was a kid, especially, that fascination had a lot of fear. Okay. One of the scariest noises I could hear, I actually shared it with my daughter this morning, was the X-Files theme music. When I was going to bed and you hear the doo-doo, oh my gosh, it would terrify me. It was terrifying. I'd shut my eyes if I heard it on the TV and run past the TV. We really had one TV. I'd run past the room, get into my room, and just until the music was done. Okay. And then I got a little older, and this movie came out in my late high school years, Signs. I don't know if you guys remember the movie Signs, right? And it was, it was pretty scary. I think that whenever I watched it and I saw these, tall, lanky aliens, I began to say, man, I hope I don't ever drive between a cornfield. And guess what? I started driving between a cornfield and I had a pickup truck. And I had a really good fear. What would happen if I hit the alien with my truck, it flipped over my truck and landed in the bed? Do I get out and let it out? Or do I keep driving? Like, what do I do? And it was a real concern. I still don't know the answer to that question. What would I do if that were to happen? And of course, you guys probably remember that horror movie when we were all kids. Really terrifying creature out in the cornfields. Guy comes face to face and it screams at him and he screams and they run the other way. Everybody knows scary movie, Alien, E.T. Terrifying movie. Scarred me for my childhood. It was terrifying, okay? Horror film. I was legit. Oh, I was legit. It's creepy looking. Okay. That stretchy neck and nasty stuff. Anyway, so today we're going to actually talk about it though, for real. Aliens and UFOs. Okay. That's really what we're looking at. So there are all kinds of churches who have this response to aliens and UFOs. And most of the time, those responses are very dismissive. They're like, it's nothing. We don't believe in that stuff. Move on. And they see UFOs. That's great for movies, right? You make a great movie. Go watch Independence Day. That's great. But don't take it seriously. But the rest of the world has taken it seriously. Now, for those of you who are following along with our handout, it says, why are they so emotionally powerful and memorable? The reason I think it is, okay, is that we're curious people. We want to know what's out there. We look out at the stars. We look out at the universe and we're like, are we alone out there? Is there anything else out there? And then a lot of times, if it is, what does it want from us? And we have a lot of fear. We have a lot of anxiety. Like, what does this mean? So that's why I think it's so emotionally powerful, because it could matter, and it could matter a lot. So now we're going to see how seriously, the next question is, how seriously does the world take the possibility of alien life? Well, according to the Pew Research Center, these are people who do surveys and they get all this information on what people believe and what they think on different matters. They went out, they did a survey, and guess what percent of Americans would you say believe in aliens? Anybody want to throw a number out?
10%.
10%. Anyone else? 30, 20, 40? Okay. Anyone else?
80.
70? Oh my, okay. 85. Wow, okay. You guys are the closest with 70 to 85. The answer is 2 out of every 3 people you meet. It's about 65%. Believe that there is intelligent life, not just life, but intelligent life on other planets. 2 out of every 3. More people believe in aliens than believe in God. Okay, this is by the just research, okay? Now, do you know that a lot of governments have released information that seems to acknowledge the sighting of alien or UFO aircraft? Now, remember, UFO doesn't necessarily mean alien. It just means we don't know what they are. They actually have a new acronym out today, but we all know them as UFOs. They have all this research and sighting into this. And the United States, France, England, Russia, they've all released documents about their research into UFOs. Now, none of this is conclusive, but you can see they're actually looking into it. The U.S. Air Force has investigated multiple sightings and even released videos of them chasing down unidentified objects, okay? And these investigations, a lot of them are still happening today. Is the world taking this seriously? I would say they are. Okay. Even if we, like individually, might say, oh, that's crazy, but the world's taking it seriously. People from nearly every walk of life, okay, have claimed to see UFOs and aliens. Farmers out in the field by themselves, homeless people out in the streets, middle of the night, but also astronauts, government officials, presidents of the United States claim to have seen aliens or at least UFOs, right? During World War II, there were jet fighters that were fighting over Germany. And on their way back, they claimed to see unidentified flying objects involved in the war. This is a little bit weird, right? We can agree it's a little bit strange, you know? So the US government, by the way, reportedly has a special task force to investigate these unexplainable phenomena. They're looking into what it is. And so we got all this research. You guys know that NASA had started years back, probably, I don't know if it was 1980s, 1990s, this SETI program, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So what it does, there are massive antennas around receiving data from space, trying to listen for some kind of pattern, some kind of intelligent life signals coming from the world. The problem is the data is overwhelming. So there's just not enough computers involved. So a lot of people, you can actually take your home computer, of course you pay for the electric and the power, but you can actually change your screensaver to help process that data and look for patterns. So your home device can actually join the NASA research to try to look for extraterrestrial intelligence. It's called SETI program, okay? Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So all this stuff is happening, right? And so people are fascinated with aliens more than just me. I'm not the only one that's interested. And Beth, I know you like aliens too, right? So television right now, if you go and watch a movie, there's a good chance you're going to watch a movie that has to do with aliens, or a TV show has to do with aliens, or you're going to watch a report and documentaries where people are really investigating aliens. You know, there are hundreds of thousands, not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands of UFO sightings throughout the modern age, since the 1920s till now, within the last 100 years. In this year, reported UFO sightings have been about 150 to 200 that are documented. And based on recent surveys, they estimate about 1 in every 4,000 UFO sightings are actually reported. So whatever number they tell you of those reported, if their statistics are right, multiply that times 4,000 usually, okay? So what do we as Christians do with the reality of a world that's increasingly convinced of extraterrestrial life? So my whole spiel so far is to say this is not a fringe belief. Don't just cast it off. Don't just ignore it. You know, the United States has been particularly interested. Now, here's a couple people that were very, that gives us some background as to what they believe. And these are people who are very, we would consider in any other issue, reliable. So there's a guy named Gordon Cooper. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the name, but he was a decorated Air Force pilot, very well known. He was actually an aerospace engineer before he was a pilot, and he continued working as an aerospace engineer. And then he became an astronaut. He actually traveled to outer space. And when he got back, he says, this is a quote from him directly. He says, "I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles, not from Earth vehicles, and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets and are obviously more advanced than we are here on Earth. Also, I did have occasion in 1951 to have 2 days, he watched them for 2 days straight, of observation of many flights of these UFOs of different sizes flying in higher formation, generally from west to east over Europe." What does this guy have to gain by telling this story when he's already, his career is good, he's well respected, he's well educated, right? But then he tells this story. It's kind of strange. Then you get Edgar Mitchell. He's one of the astronauts from Apollo 14. He actually quotes, they asked him, you know, what do you think about all this? He says, "We are being visited." That's the only quote he would give. We are being visited. And then he pushed later in his life for government release of UFO material. US President Jimmy Carter, he said, "I don't laugh at people anymore when they say they've seen UFOs. I've seen one myself." You may not like Jimmy Carter, you may like him, but the fact is, he's claiming to see a UFO as a president. You think it's going to help his career or hurt his career? Very strange statement. Gerald Ford, now before he became president, he was in Congress, and he says, in the firm belief the American public deserves a better explanation than that thus far given by the Air Force, I strongly recommend that there be a committee investigation of the UFO phenomenon. I think we owe it to the people to establish credibility regarding UFOs and to produce the greatest possible enlightenment of the subject. He didn't claim to see a UFO, but he believed the government knew than what it was more than what it was telling, right? So this isn't just late night talk. This isn't just joking around talk. It's not a conspiracy theory. People have been seeing something. Not only that, they've been recording these events, and it's become more frequent that they're recording. And I think the reason for that is now we all carry a camcorder with us everywhere we go, right? If you see something weird, what's the first thing you do? Pull out your camera, pull out your phone, and start recording it. We get all these videos. In 1993, in broad daylight, okay, we were over the most populous city in the world, okay, way more people than New York City. This is Mexico City. People began to see these metallic objects. They have pictures of planes in the forefront and these separate metallic objects way above the planes, flying in these sporadic maneuvers. So what happened? A lot of the news anchors back when they had those big cameras, they recorded the events. Now you can go look at those videos today. You can go back and see them. And a lot of people, Christians and otherwise, in Phoenix, Arizona, you guys ever heard of the Phoenix Lights? There was actually this series of lights that were shaped like a massive V, okay? They were these 5 lights in sequence, and they were just moving very slowly over the city of Phoenix. They're recorded, and then what did the official explanation say? Oh, they're just flares. Okay, well, maybe they're flares, but it's kind of weird they're moving together, right? Never seen a flare do that before, but maybe they are. Okay, that's what they would say. And a lot of the observers who saw them, again, like I said, some of them were Christian. And when people ask them, what do they mean? Is that we don't know what to make of it, right? And that's a fair statement. Don't know what to make of it. Now, let's also be very clear. A lot of the UFO sightings and events and encounters, they're fake. There's a lot of fakes out there, a lot of hoaxes, right? So you guys heard of Roswell, I'm sure. Roswell, the big crash actually, that's what most people focus on. In 1947, there is no question that on that farm, something crashed. But they got to look at the material. They even analyzed the material. And it was made of balsa wood and tape. So unless you think the aliens decided to travel here in a cardboard box, that was not an alien crash. Okay, I'm not saying that people don't see other weird things, but the Roswell is not a great example. And I think the reason it's so prominent is because it's not a great example to make people not, to think this is all silly, right? So, but this doesn't explain away all the other experiences and footage and all the crazy stuff that people come across. So some of them, let's go ahead and throw these out. Some of them are probably secret government projects. Surely they test new aircraft, test new techniques, and sometimes these things crash or are seen by people, so people misunderstand what they are. Sure, some of them are weather balloons and other secret planes. But again, does that mean all of them? Okay. So whether we like it or not, some people are seeing something, and it cannot be explained by natural man-made sources that we're aware of. We'll at least say it that way. So we can speculate all we want. We can guess, we can talk, we can discuss all this. But I think the purpose as Christians for us, whenever we come across these things, is to tell people the biblical perspective. What does the Bible tell us about what we should expect and what we should do whenever people encounter such things? So to start, I'm going to share with you, before we get into the Bible, I'm going to share with you a couple real extraterrestrial encounters, okay? First one comes from a pair of men in the woods. The second one comes from a couple that were farmers, all right? First story, man is walking with his companion, and all of a sudden they cross this creek, and this blinding light blasts them apart, okay? Blinding light blasts them apart. He's here, his friend is now far away from him. Look, he can see his friend, but he's far away. And then all of a sudden, his friend is surrounded with these glowing, burning creatures. They surround him, they take him, and they abduct him. And a whirlwind, a big tornado follows as they take off from the ground, and he's never seen his friend since. Pretty weird. You agree? Okay. Second story, 2 farmers. They're sitting in their garden one day, right? They're working. And the wife, she encounters this lizard-like creature. Okay, kind of comes towards her. Doesn't explain it. The story doesn't explain it, but it communicates with her, and it offers her, some kind of supernatural knowledge, some understanding that she didn't have before. And she's like, tells her husband, like, what do we do here? And they decide to accept it, right? And next thing they know, their brain is overwhelmed with new information. Like they just understand things they've never understood before. But then they also find out they're naked in the middle of the field. And then next thing you know, what happens? They try to hide because another being shows up and is angry with them. And they try to hide. And of course, they end up getting cast out of the farm. And these other aliens with energy weapons forbid them from ever coming back to where they lived. Pretty weird story, right? Carly, why are you smiling?
Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden, what's the first one? Huh? Nope.
Is it Elijah?
Elijah being taken to heaven. So you don't have to go very far in the Bible. If you take away the spiritual encounter, right? If you take away what we know to be spiritual, what does it sound like? What does it sound like when you hear the Bible stories, but you were to exclude the spiritual knowledge that we understand? Don't they sound very similar to some alien encounters, to some alien abductions, right? You don't have to go very far in the Bible. You can get within the first 3 chapters, right? Where you see humans engaging with spirit world. You see God coming down to talk with Adam and Eve. You see Satan coming down to talk with Adam and Eve. A few chapters later, what do you find? You find Cain speaking with God, right? Making offerings to God, fire coming down from heaven and accepting Abel's sacrifice. We get to chapter 6, we start talking to chapter 7, I think. No, it's 6, it's 7. But the thing that where we see the sons of God coming to the daughters of men and interacting with them, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So the point is, we see, if we go strictly from the Bible, put aside everything else, we're going to see all kinds of non-earthly creatures interact with the humans, okay? So like I said, Adam and Eve, they communicated with God, who is spirit, but he came down to them in physical form as a man. Look in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8. He says, and they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Walking, they heard his voice and they heard him walking. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. So without speculating about the fact that God became a physical form there, which probably means it was Jesus Christ walking in the garden. But the fact is, we see that they were able to run from his presence. He wasn't just spiritually there. He was physically there and they could hide from him, right? So earlier, again, we talked about how the lizard man, right? Remember who was that? Of course, Satan coming down as a serpent. Was he physically there or spiritually there? He was physically there, right? He was physically there speaking. He was not a snake possessed by Satan. Satan is the snake. So how do we know that? Well, the story tells us in Genesis chapter 3. But then if you go to Revelation chapter 12, when we talk about the end and the destruction of Satan, when you get to the end of Revelation, but in the middle of it, Revelation 12:9 says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent. He is the old snake. He is the snake, not possessing the snake. He is the snake, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. His whole purpose from the beginning has been to deceive the world. So later again, we talk about how those angels, remember my energy weapon guards from there? When God casts Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, how does he block the return to the Garden of Eden? He puts some number of cherub angels. They're called cherubim, which is the plural of cherub. And they have a flaming sword to make sure that they can't get back to the tree of life. This is pretty interesting stuff. Again, what does it look like when you get these supernatural encounters? To everyone here, if I gave you those stories in the biblical language, you would say, yeah, Elijah went to heaven in a chariot of fire, Yeah, Adam and Eve, they saw the serpent and they got kicked out of the garden. But do you know how strange that would sound if you didn't understand the spiritual world? I mean, that would be weird, would it not? It would be an encounter, would you not think? So a lot of the spiritual encounters from the Bible, again, if you remove the spiritual, you have a lot of similarities between them and extraterrestrial encounters and unidentified flying objects, UFOs. So what do we see whenever we look at UFO stories? Well, they say, oh, well, this thing appeared out of nowhere, shot across the sky way faster than it could have, defied physics, and then disappeared. Well, let's see. How would you explain? I'll give you a few options here, okay? So that was the biblical precedent, was again the spiritual encounters. But let's look at a few different ones and tell me how you guys might explain it if you weren't allowed to use the spiritual world. So you have the burning bush, a bush that's bright, is on fire, but never is consumed. How'd you explain that? Can't use spiritual. The answer cannot be God did it. What would your explanation be? Anyone? Do you have one? Some new source of fuel, an unexplained phenomenon, right? Something, some new technology, maybe LED lights. I don't know. What would you pick? Okay. How about if you had hail coming down, and that seems to be natural, right? But with these ice chunks of hail, fire also falls. Doesn't that sound like some kind of special? You can't use God, but you got to use something else. Well, what are you going to use? A comet? Okay, some extraterrestrial thing. A comet coming from outer space or a weapon coming? All right.
It's freezing in space. It comes through and heats up. Parts of it didn't get completely melted, so there'd be ice and there'd be fire too.
A mixture of ice and fire. Okay, so extraterrestrial, maybe not alien in origin, but something supernatural, right? How about if you had to explain how darkness covered only the land of Egypt, but not the land of Goshen, and it was darkness so deep that it could be felt? Remove the spiritual. Wouldn't we call that some kind of weapon or cloaking device or something where you can hide things even in plain daylight? I mean, doesn't this seem like a way advanced technology? Again, if somebody just had the story from the Egyptians' point of view during these, what we call the plagues of Egypt, we know because we see it from God's point of view. This is what God did. But what would you say if you were reading it in some Egyptian history book? How would you explain it? Some extra-worldly being caused these things, right? How about the targeted death of the firstborn of Egypt, including the animals? Isn't that genetic targeting or some type, right? Somehow being able to target every single person who's a firstborn? Explain how the Ark of the Covenant melted the face off that guy in Indiana Jones. Now, obviously, that's not from the Bible, but the Ark of the Covenant, what did it do? It took a massive stone statue and forced it to bow down. How did that happen? Some anti-gravity weapon, right? How about, again, we already talked about Elisha. Remember, he was abducted by aliens, wasn't he? Explain it without using God and going to heaven. Explain Elisha's disappearance without using that. It would be an alien abduction, would it not? How about what Ezekiel saw? You guys ever read Ezekiel chapter 1? If you haven't read Ezekiel chapter 1, give it a read. See what you think. He looks up in the sky. There's this massive throne, these aliens, these massive angels, cherubs they're called, and they have eyes everywhere, and they're surrounded by these omnidirectional wheels. They turn in every direction. They create massive whirlwinds, and all of that just to move the throne of God. What would you call that if you didn't understand the spiritual world? Not some kind of UFO or spacecraft? How would you explain it otherwise, right? How about if all of a sudden you're looking at space, you're looking up at the night sky, you're enjoying the cool weather, and all of a sudden tons of flying creatures are standing there, all saying the same thing at once? Explain that one. But oh wait, that's not all. They also are going to leave a light beacon that follows some guy around for the next 2 to 3 years. Wouldn't that be kind of strange? I mean, do you see what I'm saying? I'm going after example after example after example of the things we know that God did because it's recorded in the Word of God. Do you think the only miracles God ever did are only in the Bible? No, we know that to be not true. John even says, if I were to write down everything that Jesus did, there wouldn't be enough books in the world to contain it all. Or he says, I suppose there wouldn't. He's being obviously, what's the word I'm looking for? Flavorful in his wording. But the idea was, we know there are all sorts of miracles and interactions of the spiritual world with the earth that we don't have recorded. But even the ones we do have What would you come up with? I mean, a guy saw a hand writing on a wall of the palace. Isn't that a hologram or a projection of some sort? It's again, it would be all alien. You could go on and on and on. But the general gist is if you remove the spiritual truth from the Word of God, you are left with supernatural encounters that most people would explain away as either alien or otherwise, right? So the world interprets them incorrectly. They interpret them as outworldly, which they are, but they've just misunderstood the source. The aliens that are coming from they're not coming from other planets, but they're coming from the spiritual world, spiritual beings entering into a physical dimension. So that's only looking again at the events recorded in the Bible. Now, let's see here. Angels and demons. Do we have any evidence that they've interacted with humans thus far? We've given some examples, right? But we do know that even in the spiritual world, angels can only be at one place at one time. Demons can only be at one place at one time. Satan isn't out watching and listening to every word we say. There's only a certain number of demons, but they can only be in one place at one time. So we know that even in the spiritual world, in their own dimension, they take up certain space. So do you guys remember whenever Gabriel wants to come and talk to Daniel? Okay. So Gabriel wants to talk to Daniel, and Daniel's been praying for 21 days, and Gabriel can't get there. Does anybody remember why?
He was fighting.
His path was blocked. So I'll read to you from Daniel chapter 10, verse 2. That's right. He says in Daniel 10:2, he says, in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 full weeks. He has been crying and praying to God for 21 days. And then, verse 12, he says, Gabriel shows up. He says, fear not, Daniel. From the first day that you set your heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard. God heard you on day 1, right? And I am come for thy words. He was dispatched on day 1. He says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia, that would be the code name for Satan, withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. So do you see what happened? Gabriel was held up for 21 days by Satan. But Michael came and overpowered Satan to let Gabriel get the message to Daniel. So that means that they take up physical space in the spiritual world, some type of direction. So my question to you guys is, what does it look like if a spiritual being enters the physical world? Could look like anything, right? But specifically, do you expect it to follow the laws of physics of this dimension? Or would it be different? So I give people this example, and I think it's a reasonable one. If all of us have this piece of paper, and let's say this piece of paper is the entire world, okay? This piece of paper only has length and width, doesn't have height, because this piece of paper is 2-dimensional. If I were to take a bouncy ball and drop it through this paper, right before it hit the paper, when it was right above the paper, you wouldn't see a thing, right? Then all of a sudden, as the tip of that bouncy ball, the very edge of it, touched it, you'd see a little dot. And then what would happen? That dot would become a big circle as it's falling through the paper, right, as it gets to the middle of the ball. And then it would become a smaller circle and boop, disappear. So what would the people living on the 2-dimensional world say? There's been a UFO. Oh my gosh, it was a little dot. It became a big ring, and then poof, it was gone. Wouldn't that be a unnatural phenomenon? So what would you see again in this world if something from outside our dimension entered in? Would we not expect to see totally physics-defying phenomenon, right? We would expect to see that they wouldn't follow our rules. And if you actually go through a lot of these encounters, a lot of these observations of these UFOs, what do they say? They're moving super fast, and without slowing down even a little bit, they completely change 90 degrees direction. That is physically impossible based on the laws of this known universe. But they do it. The only way they can do it is if they're outside our dimension, not from another planet. This isn't advanced technology. This is something outside our dimension. Advanced technology can be understood by physics. You can actually see how it works. Even if you didn't understand it, you can actually study it and see how it works. These things defy technology. So we know for a fact that spiritual beings take physical form. Remember, we talked about Satan already, where he came as a snake. You know, Satan also physically interacted with the physical Jesus Christ. That comes from Matthew chapter 4, verse 5. He says, the devil takes him up into the holy city and setteth him on the pinnacle of the temple. So the devil took Jesus, devil being a spiritual being, took Jesus physically to the city, to Jerusalem, and physically set Jesus on the very highest tip of the temple. These are things that physically happened to Jesus through the spirit of the devil becoming physical and interacting with him. So just as in the Old Testament, the spiritual world is very present in the New Testament. Paul tells us there are spiritual forces around us all the time. We even encounter them physically sometimes, although we don't always realize it when we do. There's a good chance that somebody in this room has encountered and interacted with an angel, not realizing it. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, that's pretty interesting, is it not? So again, supernatural encounters, very prominent, and they have been so throughout human history. So let's take a look at a couple of them from the Bible. So 1 Kings chapter 22, verse 20, God is in heaven, okay? And he wants to see Ahab, the wicked king, destroyed. So he has a conversation with the spiritual beings in heaven. The Lord said, 1 Kings 22, verse 20, Lord said, who shall persuade Ahab that he may go up and fall by Ramoth Gilead? And one said on this manner, and another said on that manner. Different angelic and demonic beings are discussing how they would trick Ahab, or not trick him, but convince him to go to this area where he'll be killed. And there came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord and said, I'll persuade him. And the Lord said, wherewith? And he said, I will go forth and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, thou shalt persuade him and prevail also. Go forth and do so. Did you see how a spiritual being came in and influenced a physical body and actually possessed his prophets, his false prophets, to tell him a lie? There was interaction. What does Paul tell us in Ephesians 6:12? He says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but what do we wrestle against? What is the fight for Christians? It's not about the governments of the world, like some Christians have taken the stand that they're going to defy the government. No, it's not who we're fighting against. He says, we fight against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. The darkness of this world's not the problem. It's the force behind the darkness of this world. The problem is Satan and his people and his fallen angels. He says, against spiritual wickedness in high places. He says in Colossians chapter 1, verse 16, for by him were all things created. This is by God, by Jesus, that are in heaven, that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. There's a whole spiritual world, and it's not just angels. There's a whole spiritual world out there that God has created that we don't understand. We know Michael and Gabriel. How many other angels can you name that are not evil, like Satan and Apollyon? Who else can you name? How many does Jesus reference? Legions. Legions of angels. And that's just the angels. What about the fiery chariots, the fiery horses? What about the cherubs that don't follow the pattern of the angels, that look like creatures of different things? We don't even begin to understand the spiritual world. But we do know there are physical items from our point of view. Even the throne of God is described as like a mechanical thing, even though it's obviously not mechanical. But we can see where it can be misunderstood without the light of the Bible. Hebrews 13:2, Paul says, you've interacted. He says, be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Are you treating everyone the way you would treat God? Because God's messengers, the angels, are in your presence, right? Ephesians 2:2, he says, and this is what tells you who's working behind the scenes of the world governments. We'll find out that it is actually Satan. he says, wherein, here, pass that back that way, if you don't mind. If anybody needs to look at the answer key there. So he says, wherein in times past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air. When you weren't following Jesus, you were dealing with demons. You were dealing with the prince of the power of the air. Who is that? Satan. Who works for Satan? The fallen angels. The spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. According to Paul, you're either for Christ or you're for the evil spiritual side, Satan and his fallen ones. So, going back to the Bible, signs in the skies, they can be seen to the natural world as unidentified objects. We talked about Ezekiel's vision. What about when the skies darkened? Remember when Jesus died? What happened to the light? For 3 hours, darkness, right? Stairways into heaven. Remember Jacob saw that? How would you explain that if you take away the spiritual? Beam me up, Scotty. I don't know. What's it going to be, right? So again, most non-Christians, they actually will cite the Bible as evidence for UFOs by using the visions of the prophets, particularly Ezekiel. Okay? So the whole idea is people like to believe in the supernatural so long as they don't have to believe in God. And that's a drive for all humans. So let's get to another topic here. How about alien abductions? Anybody ever seen those stories, right? Oh, they probed me, Ma, right? And that's the stories you get, right? Well, how does the story usually go? I was out in the woods, or I was sitting at home, I was in my bed, and all of a sudden there was this bright light, man. They suddenly captured me. They transported me. I was floating in the air. They took me to their ship, and they did all kinds of experiments on me, right? And then what happened? Oh, then they implanted something in me. They impregnated me. They did something strange, right? And now I have this alien spawn growing in me. Well, these are actually a very common theme. Even though we make fun of them, that's the common theme for people who claim abductions. You know what's interesting? When fallen angels interact with the human world, what is one of the main issues that they've done? What is the main things they've done to humans? Anybody remember? Sexual, right? Impregnation. Okay. So we know the story of the Nephilim. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 down through verse 4 says, it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. So now we have lots of women on the earth, right? Says that the sons of God, Bana Elohim, all right, saw the daughters of man, the daughters of Adam, the daughters of man, right? That they were fair. So these creatures that were not man saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. They took wives of all they chose. They began to abduct these women and take them. It wasn't that they decided to agree. They took these women before the flood. And the Lord said, again, this is all a connected thought, my spirit will not always strive with man, for he's also flesh. His day shall be 120 years. And then he goes on with the same idea. There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them. And the same became mighty men of old, men of renown. Wait a minute. So we have an event in the Bible which talks about the sons of God taking the daughters of men and creating unnatural offspring. Some people have said, oh, that's just the sons of Adam who believed the Bible or believed God, and the daughters of Cain who didn't. All the children of Adam died in the flood. They didn't believe the Bible either. Only Noah and his family. That's number one. Number two, when is the last time a Christian and a non-Christian had a baby and it was a giant? That doesn't really happen, right? There's something abnormal genetically. And what does every ancient culture talk about? Half gods, right? Half deities. Zeus came down and took a wife. And there's Hercules, and there's all these different half breeds that are half God, half man. Well, does the New Testament kind of verify all this? Well, in Jude chapter 1, verse 6 and 7, he says, the angels which kept not their first estate, so they did not keep heaven where they're supposed to be, but left their own habitation, they left where they were living, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of that great day. Wait a minute. Some fallen angels, not all of them, some of them did not get to dwell on the earth and possess and do all this other stuff. They were immediately thrown into chains of darkness under the earth. Why? He says, as Sodom and Gomorrah. So this is similar in kind. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh. They're getting involved in unnatural relationships, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Well, wait a minute. Does it say it anywhere else in the Bible? Well, in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, he said, if God spared not the angels that sinned. What's up?
February, of 1918. You said when was the last time the giant was born?
Okay.
That was, Harold, Franklin, Waldo, and Addie.
When was Andre the Giant born? he had acromegaly, but yeah. So he had gigantism and acromegaly, but yeah. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So he's saying that the angels that sinned were destroyed when that old world fell. So they were sent to those chains of darkness. So there have been abductions of otherworldly beings and humans for all of human history. And according to the Bible, it was fallen angels abducting humans, okay? So if we were to use the biblical model to predict what you would expect from an alien encounter, particularly an abduction, right? If they were supernatural from the spiritual world, what would you find? Well, let's look at the biblical pattern. Well, we should expect a few things. Number one, they should cause people to question their faith in God, to weaken their faith in God. Do you remember what Satan's encounter with Eve started out with? Did God really say? Was he serious, right? Do you think God really loves you, right? They want to offer an alternative. And then they want to offer something else. New wisdom, new technology, right? Oh, if you eat from this tree, then you'll be like God. Don't you want to be like God, knowing good and evil? You'll have new wisdom. What do the alien encounters? They told me something I never knew. They told me the future. There's always the same story, right? And on top of that, they would be interested in probing and other sexual acts that are evil or forbidden. That's what we see with the Nephilim, the fallen angels, being born of these unnatural unions. And those are, this is the biblical model, what we would expect. Well, if you go right now to non-Christian sources and you say, what are the common themes of alien abduction? Well, they follow a very narrow set of parameters. Number one, loss of control. You are helpless and you can do nothing, completely powerless. Think back to the people in the Bible that were demon possessed when Jesus walked the earth. The demons would take over, try to drown them, try to throw them in the fire, try to make them, attack people, kill people, completely powerless. Does it track? Sure does. What's the next thing? There's a focus on medical experimentation, particularly reproduction. Does that track? Is that what happened again with the fallen angels, with the Nephilim? Sure does. How about this part where people say, I don't feel like I'm in my body? It's like I'm looking down at my body. Wouldn't that argue that there's a spiritual aspect to it, where some other spirit's possessing our bodies and we are not in control again? The next thing they say is there's a message about the future, some hidden knowledge that we can obtain through interaction with them. Isn't that the promise of Satan? You'll be like gods. And then finally, there's an offer of meaning or belonging, a purpose, particularly a promise you'll be like your own God. Don't forget, the original temptation of Eve was not to disobey God. It was that you can make the rules. You don't have to listen to your God. You don't have to listen to your parent, right? She thought, well, I can do it better. No, that was the temptation. And here we see these people are freeing you from all that. So again, isn't it fascinating that alien encounters and alien abductions do exactly what we've always known fallen angels to do, right? It gets even more interesting. And I'm going to say this, and then we'll call it a day, and we'll finish up next week. There's a guy named Joe Jordan. Anybody ever heard of him? So he was actually a safety specialist at NASA. And he worked at the Kennedy Space Center. right? He still is alive today. You can go meet him if you want. He currently works in South Korea. And his main job, he supports the US military. This is not like a jokey kind of guy. This is not a fringe weirdo, okay? He went and he started a research group specifically interviewing people who claim to have alien abductions. He came across 300 abductions that were stopped immediately. They were in the middle of an abduction and it stopped immediately. Do you know how it stopped immediately every time? Reproducibly. Everybody that had an alien abduction that did not continue, they cried out the name, we're good. It was spiritual intervention, and specifically the name Jesus Christ. Why would an alien from Venus care about the name Jesus Christ? I don't think it would, right? Why would a fallen angel care about the name of Jesus Christ? I think they very much would. I think they hate that name. I think they want to see that name erased from every mind. But every single time, 300 cases where the abductions were stopped immediately was when the person cried out the name of Jesus Christ. What's even more crazy about this story is the people who claimed that, who told the story, he asked them, were you a Christian? Most were not. Most were not using the name Jesus because they were praying to him. Most were just begging, and maybe even as a foul word, right? You know, people use the name Jesus Christ. But when that name was uttered, the alien abduction stopped. I mean, a lot of them later became Christians because of the event. I think that's pretty fascinating. And we'll pick up next time whenever we talk about the poor cows that are found slaughtered and mutilated and all this stuff. Does that track with the Bible? And then we'll finish up hopefully next time with what Christians then need to do whenever we do talk to people who believe in this, and how do we put all of this into perspective. Any final thoughts or questions before we wrap it up?
God and yeah.
Mhm.
And we all, even in public school, we all said, we know what's gonna happen, we're gonna come up and disappear, and that's Satan trying to get people to think it's UFOs.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's exactly right. We're going to get to that too, is alien. First of all, we're going to talk about a couple other things. One is, can there be life on other planets? And is Satan going to use the UFO idea and the phenomenon? Is he going to use that in the end times? And while we can't prove that, I do believe he is. And I think we can see evidence in the Bible where it could easily be used as a potential way the Antichrist uses it.
Bob Lazar thing.
The what?
Bob Lazar.
What's
You
that?
never heard of him?
Mm-mm.
Bob Lazar is a guy who, and nobody's been able to disprove it, that worked at Area 51
Mm-hmm.
and seen a lot of the stuff in the crash and stuff like that. And a lot of other people, since the release of the files, have supposedly proven him right.
Yeah, well, very may be true. And the thing is, we should expect it. The whole point of this whole talk is to say we should expect extraterrestrial encounters if you exclude the spiritual. We should expect the world to come to these conclusions, and we also should expect unnatural creatures if they are in this.
I'm not sure I gotta go.
Yes, no, I have enjoyed. But we should expect unnatural creatures if we're talking about the spiritual world interacting with the physical. So none of this should surprise us, worry us, or scare us. But the question, again, like we're going to answer next time, is what do we do with it all when we have it?